Good morning. All of us are here joining today to do a presentation on the promises of non-Western rhetorics and text. What does it mean to teach and practice diversity, equity, and social justice? We want to all thank you for giving us the opportunity to present at the Four Cs, although we are not in person, we are virtually very much there and looking forward to hearing all the other presentations. Thank you. So without further ado, I shall start. The case for studying non-Western rhetorics and the text in rhetoric and composition scholarship and instruction have been made through efforts to decolonize our field's male elitist and white Euro-American history and orientation, Glenn, Royster, and Mao. These existing efforts provide this panel with a direction on how to teach non-Western rhetorics and text through a social justice lens, to intervene in discriminatory interpretation of and perceptions of these texts, and to demonstrate the promises of centralizing non-Western rhetorics in practice and teaching. Each speaker will discuss what non-Western rhetorics text can provide to our field in terms of teaching and practicing diversity, equity, and social justice as scholars, teachers. Further, as I don't want to take away time from each panelist's presentation, each one of us will be introducing ourselves before we present. We also, all of us, are respectful, and we do acknowledge the land pledge. Thank you. So without further ado, I go back and I start my presentation, The Perils of Teaching Non-Western Texts and the Promises to Showcase the Truth. Message of Ancient Texts Lost in Translation, Leading to Modern Day, Present Day Issues. I'm Uma Krishnan. I'm a professor at Kent State University in the Department of English. Thank you. My presentation focuses mainly on texts from ancient Vedic times and recent publications. So where did the shift take place in terms of the social issues? I specifically focus on gender, but more on caste system, and reveal the promises and perils of translation and interpretation based on the broad pen strokes of authors from local and other cultures, Western and non-Western. And what I showcase is how the core meaning of text and subject matters shift away and stripped away the root meaning of an ancient philosophy, ideology, and text, how they create new belief systems grounded on new definitions leading to local issues, how political and social agencies use these interpretations to their advantage to create marginalization, leading to issues of diversity, equity, and social injustices, why we need to reclaim the original rhetoric based on the context and situation of the time period. Next slide, please. So I start with oral traditions in context and text because the Vedic period or the Vedic age was considered 1500 to 500 BCE and attributed to the late Bronze Age and early Iron Age when most of the Vedic literature was composed. They were originally orally composed and transmitted from one generation to another in the form of texts. So now every text needs a context to be produced. But how should they be written, especially when it concerns information about non-Western cultures and tradition? Should it be in objective or subjective fashion? Now, if we allow it to be objective, we allow it to be factual. If we allow it to be subjective, it leads to analysis and interpretation. For example, in literacy, we all know the autonomous model of illiteracy by Goody, Watt, and Ong was perceptions of oral traditions were primitive and lacking the abstract way of thinking, till Brian Street in 1984 came along with the ideological model of literacy and said, every community has its own context and they have different contexts to write about their own text. So over a period of time, research on the Vedas, the oral traditions and memory showcase different effects. So interpretation and text also undergo a change. And in 2015, Hartzell came up with a study that oral traditions are absolutely great, and he used neuroscientific study to prove otherwise. Next slide, please. So as we saw a shift from the oral traditions being primitive to how they are absolutely magnificent in terms of memory and neurology and other things, we also see a shift in gender, in gender studies and context and text. Ancient texts showcase women as being equal to men. But later translations showcase that women were considered a second inferior, and it led to acts of dowry giving and sati, where women were put into funeral pyre. The question then arises, really, were these the original ways these texts were composed where women were treated as unequal? No. Narayanan in 1999 writes about it, and she says, there is a dissonance that takes place between scripture and later societal practices of viewing women in negative light. Next slide, please. Similarly, in the same way, caste system is also being taken out of context in texts. Vedic texts refer to society as being, four parts, and community was divided into four colors. Each division was like these four parts. Each group performed a certain act or job in society. The Brahmin class were priests, Kshatriyas were warriors, Vaishyas were merchants, and Shudras were workers. They were all four intrinsic parts of society for a society to function well. But over a period of time, the society stratification took place, leading to discrimination among societal members, which were not there in the original text. Colonizers and invaders took advantage of the situation, leading to texts being written about the Indian culture and their later oppressive practices, how people of lower caste are considered impure, ostracized in society. Next question, please. So caste system in context and text, Oliver in 2011, actually writes a commentary on the Vedic text based on context and sources. And he says that the ideology of Varna is not about purity and impurity of humans and not about social stratification. He further suggests that all four Varnas could attain purity or impurity by the content of their character, ethical and intent actions, innocence and ignorance. And he says it was later the groups, the stratification of the first top three groups of people who actually subjugated the last group to the lower caste system. That's how caste system came into being. So what does this mean in terms of depicting information in objective ways? So we move on from subjective to objective ways. Let's go to the next slide. So, and later scholars, rather earlier scholars like P. Verma in 2018, just like Oliver, talks about how great scholars like, Adi Shankara and Sri Ramanuja talk about these Vedic commentaries and texts, but there is no mention of, caste system in their text. So what does this mean for us? Move on to the next slide. So what are the perils of caste system and society stratification? What are the lessons we take away? Based on the few examples that I've provided, it is clear that external and internal agencies play a key role in how we view, understand, relate, and narrate any given situation or circumstance. Often our views are biased due to circumstances, historical, social, religious, political, or even personal views. And it taints our way of thinking about things. Based on this information, it is clear that these biases lead to text being interpreted incorrectly and subjectively, creating further bias and distrust and divisions in society. Like the autonomous model of literacy continued to exist for a very long time till the ideological model of literacy came along. So texts get reiterated, repeated, till something else comes along and challenges and proposes, and there is a new proposal for a new text and way of thinking. Next slide, please. So the promises as teachers of professors of English is we need to showcase the truth to our students, the subjective and objective ways. I started this presentation with questions that students pose in my classroom. So what is caste system? How do people interpret caste in India? Is it something that is people are ostracized from society? But I end with two responses from students of mine. It was indeed refreshing to see texts from the past to present and to see how different authors interpret texts, Western and non-Westerns, to their advantage. It was indeed noteworthy to see how rhetoric and agency play an important role in our lives and why we should be cautious about being judgmental about others. Thank you for that. Another student writes, thank you for opening my eyes to seeing what, how original text information can be lost in translation. Further, I realized that history plays an important role in our lives and why cultural memory is important to understand. The ethos of any community is very important for us to survive in modern days. Thank you. And here are my references. And our next presenter will be one.
Hello, my name is Moushumi Biswas, and I'm an assistant professor at Langston University. Today, my presentation is entitled The Promises of Exploring Gender Inequity in Non-Western Rape Narratives and the Perils of Looking Through the Western Lens. So, social justice rhetorics as seen in India might not seem up to speed at first glance. However, a deeper critical look at the context brings to light a whole corpus of rhetorical work that is aimed at preserving a set of values considered time-tested while still allowing a nation of nearly 1.5 billion to move on with the times. My presentation today traces gender inequity in accounts of violation of the female body in select texts from ancient as well as contemporary India and compares them with the evolving notion of rape in the West. The idea is to understand how non-Western cultures view gender justice based on gender relations, women's rights over their own body, and social expectations. So even while, next please, even while we discuss serious matters, funny things happen. In January this year, a group of men in India launched what they called a marriage strike on Twitter. These men's rights activists said feminism is misguided and gone too far and refused to get married. Reacting to a case in the Delhi High Court, they said feminism is destroying Indian values. So you see the tweet there. And then next, please. In response, a woman said, I strongly hope that such men who are going on the marital strike remain on strike forever. So you have the both sides. You have both sides at war at each other, as it were. Then on February 8, NPR reported that India was on the threshold of a historic court decision regarding marital rape. As of this moment, marital rape is not criminal or illegal in India. However, that could change if the Delhi High Court deems so in the near future. In India, most cases of domestic sexual violence go unreported. Next, please. For instance, as the NPR article mentions, there was a domestic worker from Dharavi, a slum in Mumbai, whose alcoholic husband raped her for years, every time she was unable to pay for his liquor. She never told anyone simply because she was not aware of her rights over her own body. As it happens, women are often reluctant to speak about marital rape because they believe their husbands own their bodies. Social workers have been holding workshops to educate women about sexual violence and consent, while Delhi High Court weighs whether to criminalize marital rape. Next, please. According to the Indian government's latest National Family Health Survey, about 30% of Indian women in the age group of 18 to 49 reported experiencing spousal violence. In fact, the average Indian woman is 17 times more likely to face sexual violence from her husband than from anyone else. According to the survey of 724,115 women, this is from the NPR report dated February 8. The fight to criminalize marital rape goes back decades, but it gained steam in 2012 when a brutal, next please, gang rape from a New Delhi bus shocked the whole world. The victim, who died of her injuries, became known as Nirbhaya, meaning the fearless. Her case triggered a reform of India's rape laws, prompting a wider definition of what constitutes rape and longer prison sentences for convicts. Police departments across India added Nirbhaya brigades of female officers who patrol dark streets at night. Next, please. The changes in the wake of this horrific case are an example of how discourse, power relations, and institutions are interconnected elements in social activity or praxis, folklore, and how they can create a fruitful social justice movement. According to Nereen Daruwala, a program director for prevention of violence against women and children at Sneha, a nonprofit group doing health and safety outreach in Mumbai slums, rape within the home is still considered private. There is no recognition, there is no protocol. This is very different from the definition of rape in the US, as Captain Olivia Benson of SVU will tell you. Section 375 of the Indian Penal Code prohibits rape, but includes an exception that says sexual intercourse or sexual acts by a man with his own wife, the wife not being under 15 years of age, is not rape. Equal rights advocates point out that the battle to close that loophole and explicitly make marital rape a crime is long overdue. However, some conservatives see it as radical, even destructive to traditional Indian values that harken back to Vedic times. Long ago, sometime around the 8th and 9th centuries BCE, a war of epic proportions was fought in the Indian subcontinent as documented in Mahabharata. One of the warring sides consisted of 5 brothers called the Pandavas. What's interesting for a scholar of gender inequity is the fact that the 5 brothers had a common wife by the name Draupadi. This is how Draupadi ended up having 5 husbands. She actually chose only one of the brothers, the handsome archer Arjuna, at a Swamvara, which is a gathering of prospective suitors. When the triumphant, newlywed Arjuna and his brothers returned home, they informed their mother Kunti, who was meditating at that time, about the trophy. Without opening her eyes, Kunti told them to share equally whatever they had brought home, and that is how all 5 brothers took Draupadi as their wife. While the Western view may seem to be in stark contrast with that in some parts of the East, the purpose of this study of gender inequity is to urge a more nuanced reading of non-Western texts considering the questions they posed for society. In this story from the Mahabharata, the dichotomy regarding women's rights is obvious. Draupadi, a princess, can pick her husband from an assembly of the best suitors in the subcontinent, but she can't disobey her mother-in-law who issued a directive in error. It's also notable how men obeyed their mothers without questioning. However, it's also said there was a more practical reason behind Kunti's apparently strange directive to her sons. The Pandavas were in exile at that time, and it was important to keep the family of 5 brothers together, bonded as it were with a common wife. In other words, given the hostile political scenario, the higher cause of domestic unity trumped Draupadi's personal wishes and desires. Here is yet another point to note. While it's true that Draupadi didn't sign up to marry 5 men, it's well documented that her partiality for Arjuna was held against her as per the principles of dharma, which is cosmic law underlying right behavior and social order, which is why she was the first to perish in the Himalayas when the Pandavas renounced the world. In fact, the Mahabharata itself is about the conflicts of dharma, which echoes in current day conflicts of values. Now, the rhetoric of rape, especially gang rape, usually points to a ruined female body. But what about the case of Draupadi? Was it not rape in the name of marriage mandated by family and society? The good news is, even as India continues to debate whether violation of a woman's body within marriage can indeed be considered rape, if it can even be called violation, the country witnessed a phenomenal surge in willingness to report rape cases over the past decade. This owes to extensive media coverage and conviction of rapists. Then, what does this discussion mean for Western rhetorical instruction? Also, why is it important to know, next please, what gender equity means in other parts of the globe? Discourse on social justice and gender in India, the world's most populated democracy, makes space for voices against sexual violence while simultaneously calling for the conservation of traditional family values. It's a dynamic, constantly evolving space embracing non-Western and Western precepts and practices while helping construct arguments that uphold rights of women. This is a space for increased negotiation within nuanced situations as required by contemporary global discourse. Fairclough. In times when East and West need to collaborate across political and cultural divides and work on such urgent matters as women's agency over their own health and bodies, I believe we need to enter the discourse on gender inequity with more creative dialogical capacities than ever before. Thank you. Next, we have just the references.
Thank you. I'm Eda Ozyesilpinar. I'm an assistant professor of rhetoric and composition at Illinois State University. Today, in my presentation, I reflect on my experiences teaching non-Western social justice rhetorics in my rhetorical theory and applications course. I will focus on one of the units of this course, understanding feminist rhetorics and social justice activism, which is when I introduce students to violence against women and LGBTQ+ community in Turkey, and engage with the rhetorical life and circulation of the Istanbul Convention Saves Lives hashtag across social media platforms as a form of public writing and community building. Through my coursework, I will discuss the importance of creating space for non-Western experiences for students to develop an intersectional and transnational understanding of equity, diversity, and social justice. Istanbul Convention is a major human rights treaty establishing comprehensive legal standards to ensure women's rights to be free from violence. This European legal instrument was negotiated by its 47 member states and adopted on April 7, 2011 by its Committee of Ministers, and it was open for signature on May 11, 2011. In March 2021, Turkey announced its decision to withdraw from the Istanbul Convention, which officially took effect in July 2021. In an official statement released by Turkish government's Directorate of Communications, the argument made to withdraw from the convention was that the convention was, quote, incompatible with Turkey's social and family values, end quote. In the statement, it is also claimed that withdrawal from the convention is not a reflection on Turkish government's commitment to protecting women and women's rights, that the government continues its efforts to fight and end violence against women in Turkey. However, according to the 2021 report by We Will Stop Femicides platform, 280 women were killed in Turkey and 217 women were found dead under suspicious circumstances. The government's position addressing these femicides and violence puts the blame on women and LGBTQ+ community in multiple ways, while protecting individuals committing these violent crimes using a rhetoric of manipulation, constantly referring to the so-called Turkish Islamic family values. This rhetoric dehumanizes and demonizes women and LGBTQ+ community, and as the founder of the We Will Stop Femicides platform, Gülsüm Kaf, states, it stigmatizes feminism as something that rejects the concept of motherhood, while also claiming that gender equality is against nature. There has been major protests in Turkey organized by feminist activist groups and organizations, and these activist efforts also have been using the rhetorical and communicative power of the World Wide Web and social media platforms, which formed a strong collective movement that came together through the use of Istanbul Convention Saves Lives hashtag. In my English 283 Rhetorical Theory and Applications course, I introduced students to the hashtag itself to study and understand non-Western social justice rhetorics in the sociocultural and political public setting of Turkey. Our unit on understanding feminist rhetorics is when students engage with intersectional feminist rhetorical praxis and activism in the Turkish public setting. In this setting, students explore the rhetorical dimensions of women's rights activism as they study the rhetorical function, use, and circulation of the hashtag. Students' rhetorical engagement with the hashtag itself, while there has been many different approaches, discussions about the hashtag, I would like to focus on three main areas. And the first one is intersectional community thinking in practice. So by examining the rhetorical life and circulation of this hashtag, students engage with what Abby de Camp and Ellen Cushman frames as intersectional community thinking, which, quote, emphasizes that communities, publics, and intersectionality are not separate or opposed understandings. Instead, all communities help us understand and form relationships, and all relationships help us understand our sense of community, end quote. Through this practice, students were able to reflect on and recognize relational connections between the public settings of Turkey and the US, with a focus on feminist activist rhetorics, while also respecting and understanding differences between these two public settings. For example, students brought up the Texas abortion law and the protests that took place in response to it. They identified that in both public settings, rhetorics of dehumanization and demonization were used to justify violence targeting women and their freedom, and that in both public settings, activists have been fighting against a system of oppression and toxic masculinity. The second area that I would like to focus on, the inclusivity of the hashtag itself and the larger movement. By tracing the hashtag across social media platforms, students utilize their research skills and rhetorical reading and analysis skills. Through this research, they came to see that the invention of the hashtag was a rhetorical move in itself, a rhetorical move of inclusivity. The convention creates this inclusivity to address, support, and create a community for women coming from and of all backgrounds, identities, and lives. As it is stated on the Council of Europe's webpage, explaining the key principles of the convention, quote, the non-discriminatory implementation of the Istanbul Convention is essential to ending violence against all women, end quote. As one student addressed, the hashtag does not discriminate, nor does it exclude any individual who were and are subjected to violence on the basis of their gender, sexual orientations, and identities. And the final area that I would like to focus on is storytelling as a rhetorical practice of community building and activism. Students also engage with testimonies about the importance of the convention shared on the Council of Europe's page. These testimonies show them how larger organizing bodies supporting the implementation of the Istanbul Convention in a global setting use storytelling as a rhetorical practice of community building and communicating the importance of the convention. Students read testimonies shared by activists, journalists, community organizers, NGO directors, professors, etc., from different countries and parts of Europe and Central Asia on the Council of Europe's website, speaking to the transformative power of the Istanbul Convention and that the Istanbul Convention saves lives. They emphasize the rhetorical power of these testimonies and how effective they were to explicate and demonstrate the significance of the convention and its community building power. As one student indicated, the use of storytelling was able to provide a human experience from multiple perspectives in hopes of people being able to connect. This connection formed through storytelling enables students to see gender-based violence as a global problem and human rights issue, while also recognizing that there's a shared experience of social justice activism aiming to end gender-based violence. Integrating non-Western and social justice rhetorics created space for students to ask critical questions. For example, a student stated that just because this gender-based violence happens over there and not over here, not in a first world country, doesn't mean that it is less important, nor that we should not hear or learn about it. On the contrary, we should learn and educate ourselves so that we can support women everywhere and support different causes and groups fighting for justice and equality in a global setting. Furthermore, through the power of using hashtags on social media, we can build communities crossing geographical borders, connecting people instead of dividing them. Students asking important questions and using their global and rhetorical awareness to construct arguments supporting more education and awareness about non-Western social justice movements was possibly the most important outcome for me as an educator. The reward of integrating non-Western social justice rhetorics into my teaching was students practicing their intersectional community thinking and recognizing the importance of understanding shared experiences to form and build communities of relations as a way to fight against oppression, discrimination, and violence toward justice, equality, and equity for all. Oops. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm kind of wrapping up this panel today with a slightly different perspective on non-Western belonging to the globe. So discursive promises of feminine rhetoric in the US upper writing course. My name is Maria Prikhodko. I'm a faculty member at DePaul University, and I'm here to present to you this short presentation. Next slide, please. So maybe Eda, you able to click and just play it on mute? I hope it's just muted. It's okay. Just kind of, it represents the vastity of what I'm going to talk about. So So why this video is playing, I'm going to start with the second portion. So feminine use of language as part of rhetorics of motherhood, influenced by the Russian ethnic and cultural symbolism mother. And that monument is a symbolism of motherhood in Russia. And since I was born and raised in Russia, that's ingrained symbol for me of native land connected to a mother image, and serves as a vector to construct family-like dialogue between ethnicities in the nation. But to me, I implement the same construction within the courses that I teach. So you can stop there. But the other concept, male whiteness, and why even embrace feminine use of language as part of rhetoric of motherhood in the course, in the writing course that I teach. Because of male whiteness that embedded into cultural communication studies. According to Warren 2003, points out that male whiteness intercultural communication force practitioners to construct a sameness and relying on conformity when building communication across borders. In this course, it's particularly important because it was more crossing physical and geography borders between DePaul cohort and the cohort from the partnering institution in Brazil. So next slide, please. So what the course is all about. So that's the course Word 377, Writing and Social Engagement, Writing Across Borders at DePaul, and it's with a partner institution from Brazil, located in Fortaleza. So partnership usually happens in spring, and it's kind of a virtual exchange program between DePaul and other institutions around the world. But this course is aimed to support faculty to construct collaborative international learning experience, but also embrace a global citizenship. So the course description that reads, and you see that on the slide, in this particular course about writing across borders, students explore topics such as the role of culture in writing, the role of nativism in English rhetoric, writing from a linguistic and cultural diverse audience. Around week 4, students start engaging in weekly collaborations with Christos University students. But most importantly, that students from Fortaleza, they view English as a second language for international purposes. So they kind of coming with predefined notion that US students are native speakers and they own communication and they own constructive, they own the language itself. And that's what I am stepping in to say and kind of construct the dialogue that it's not true, right? So like that's why we're bringing a lot of non-Western traditions into the course conceptually and discursively. So next slide, please. So very important in this course is my positionality, because myself, born and raised in Russia, I teach composition and rhetoric course in a predominantly white Catholic university, and being myself Orthodox, as subject masters only for 8 years now, but I'm still considered ESL, and I'm mostly just myself demographically marginalized within the department, being just the only person, the only faculty member from not born and raised in the United States. So my colleague is very important, that also from the partner institution, born and raised in Germany, but now serves as the head of international affairs in that Brazilian university, also considered ESL in the global context. So we kind of juggling almost 4 different contexts, 2 national contexts and our own context that we're bringing as instructors and also community members. So in this particular presentation, I talk about discursive construction of actual deconstruction of sameness and a conformity of values and practices that we're bringing to understand what even means to be different. And another way of deconstructing will be conceptual. So, and I'm going to demonstrate each of those. Next slide, please. So the first is conceptual deconstruction of sameness, that male discourse and white male discourse of intercultural communication imposes, but instead I invite students to deconstruct that with me by problematizing the role of culture in writing studies, especially how whiteness and US-based writing models are viewed around the world. So that's not the only one, it's not the dominant one around the globe. And you see on the right, a conceptual construction of non-sameness to oppose male whiteness in intercultural communication studies. And as you see, the list of scholars and scholarship that I'm bringing for students to investigate and respond and reflect on by presenting, by doing joint presentations, but also in using those concepts that we learn aside from collaborations with Brazilian students, actually to use them as jumping off points to say how to understand sameness or differences from different perspectives, different fields of study. And name a few: racial linguistics, ethics of intercultural dialogue, rhetoric in general, applied linguistics, intersectionality of identities, and economics. So next slide, please. So now I would like to present discursive deconstruction of sameness from students' perspectives. So as you see in the table on the left, I say ways that students co-construct their identities not as same, but as they were not even different, but connecting to each other. An assignment the first assignment that I'm using as an example, final reflections that are all writing by Padlet. It's an online virtual wall tool. And one example from students from that wall. I can see myself as a better global citizen now because I understand how different cultures and ideologies can be used to strengthen a connection that you can have with another person rather than hinder it. So that's important. That's a point of connection, but not really emphasizing sameness of experience. And another assignment here that I'm using as an example, essay on intersectionality of identities that both cohorts wrote and usually write when I teach the course. An example from one of the students from US part reads, another invisible identity is my sexuality. I have been assumed to be anything but straight based on appearance or the way I act. This, however, does not minimize the way I identify with my identity. This is also true of how I'm currently in a heterosexual relationship. This does not minimize my queer identity. So again, like in different ways, I invite students either conceptually or discursively to define difference rather than sameness. Most importantly, we're trying to find points of connection rather than just saying, for example, identifying or defining identities in the United States would be very different from identifying themselves. Even concept of race in Brazil, it's constructed very differently. I know, like within race, they have very many problems identifying themselves as white, but they more ethnicity. It's like how I'm supposed to be white, but being not Hispanic or Latinx. So all of those concepts are so important to bring up from maybe not even Western perspective. So next slide, please. In the next slide, I would like to share a few ways I discursively deconstruct sameness through my own perspective, because I carry a lot of rhetoric and my own non-Western belonging and identity into this course as a teacher, instructor, and scholar. So my ways that I deconstruct sameness would be through my own discursive practices that I embody not only into syllabus, into different materials, but also through feedback and communication. So first of all, hedging when I rhetorically aware and trying to be consciously aware how I frame feedback and communication, starting with I wonder, at the start of the sentence. So hedging doesn't actually have very positive connotations because it kind of comes across as if the speaker is unsure and insecure. But in this particular case, I really emphasize that it's a part of feminine use of rhetoric and can function more as a suggestion, as a call for the audience to participate in the wondering and consideration. So, and the other example, weekend statements, close to hedging, but I use them more often, not only in communication, as I said, but also in the syllabus and tasks, when I'm introducing tasks too. For example, words like maybe, probably, verbs like could, would, weekend, whatever statements that, usually we make. But in this case, in this conversation about rhetoric of motherhood, they more serve as acts of compassion for students and even my colleague. So next slide, please. So promises for writing classrooms. What's the whole presentation about? First of all, endorsing intersectionality, intersectional definitions of diversity and equity. What is right for one person, and even within a race, ethnicity, or gender, maybe not right for another, even within the same race, within ethnicity, because like every single person, different experiences, right? And embedding feminine rhetoric of motherhood to problematize sameness as a dominant concept of a patriarchy discourse like intercultural communication studies or Western rhetoric of communication. So hedging weakened sentences, inclusive pronouns as we, us, as community, and conceptually diversifying the curriculum to invite interdisciplinary ways to define sameness from different perspectives, different scholarships. I think that's it. And then the next slide has selected references. Thank you so much.
So thank you all for giving us an opportunity to present. As you saw, we brought about the promises and perils of teaching non-Western rhetoric to Western audience and to non-Western audience too. So what are the challenges we face, and how can we be more inclusive and respectful for all the communities whom we interact with, and what can we do as scholar teachers to help each other, to help our students. So based on that, we would like to thank you. And here, if you have any questions, please feel free to contact us through these emails.